And we are live. Hello and good afternoon once again, and welcome along to the How to Stay Sane in a Pandemic webcast. I'm really pleased to have your company as per usual. If you're watching this live, we are going out at the moment on Twitter and on Facebook and on YouTube. And then if you are going to, I know a lot of you will watch this back afterwards, and you're very welcome along as well. From tomorrow, this webcast will be available on my website, where it'll join all the other episodes. And my website is barbarascully.com. And if you are enjoying it, and my feedback tells me that you are, and I would really love if you spread the word and shared the links, which will be available, as I say, immediately after this broadcast. This is actually the last one that I'm going to do for this year, obviously with Christmas coming along, but I do tend to be back in January with some more interesting guests with more suggestions of how to stay sane in the pandemic or otherwise. Anyway, speaking of guests, I am a little nervous this week because my guest is one of the most intelligent, insightful, and quick-minded people that I've come across, which makes me a little bit nervous. She is the communications expert and author and commentator, Terry Prone. Terry, how are you?
I was doing okay until that introduction, and I began to think, yeah, this is a great opportunity to prove Barbara wrong.
I would be very surprised if you managed to do that. I think although you prove me wrong usually when we're talking about anything else, as we have done over the years. You just look so cozy sitting there with your books behind you, which we'll come to in a minute, and your Christmas tree twinkling away there in the background. Are you all set for Christmas?
Yes, absolutely. Dead on. Nothing left to do, although I do have a couple of books and box of chocolates in reserve for, that awful moment when you say, oh, Jesus, I forgot so-and-so. So I always have reserve presents, but with luck, I won't actually need them.
And I hope if you're like me, those reserved presents will be things you like as well, because after Christmas, when they're still there, you can indulge.
That just means two things: chocolate and books. I actually believe, Barbara, that life is possible if you have four things: chocolate, books, WD-40, and duct tape. Once you've those four things, nothing is beyond you.
WD-40?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gee, are you not a WD-40 person?
No, I wouldn't know what to do with WD-40.
Oh, WD-40 is fantastic. Anything that is stuck, WD-40 will unstick it. Anything that has gone rusty, if you have, for example, a mirror in your bathroom that fogs up just when you want to address your awfulness in it, WD-40 will stop it. WD-40 is just the most fantastic thing.
Holy God Almighty.
Have several sprays of it.
Oh my God. Well, there you go. Top tip right there. I wasn't expecting that. Come here. How are you finding life in this restricted way that we're living now? I have a feeling it might suit you a little bit, does it?
Well, I think that I probably should be the spokesperson for the recluses of Ireland, because we're doing real well. We're doing real well. Nobody can visit us without a formal invitation and practically a Garda pass. There's acres of silence and solitude and the capacity to read and think and just not have anything to do with people while continuing to work. That's the one thing that has surprised me. I'm in the communications consultancy business, and when the pandemic started early last year, there were a few days, a few weeks of absolute panic of, this is actually going to bring the company down. We're going to lose people. We're going to have to put people on short, all of that sort of stuff. And it simply never happened. We worked out ways to do things that I would never have believed were possible. Because training is such an up close and personal thing. I never thought that we could do it online, but our young people in the office have just developed ways of doing it. And so we face into the new year with reasonable optimism. Thanks be to God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's really good to hear. That's it. We'll come back to doing things in a different way a little bit later on, but I'm going to start where I always start because I was well. First of all, we're going to start with books where we always start. But first of all, before I ask you about recommendations, please share with our audience because I didn't yet. How many books have you read thus far this year?
Oh, about 243. I usually read a book a day, but then you have books that run to 800 pages, and so that means that you're slightly behind the number of days in the year. But I read more than I do anything else, and always have. I mean, when I was a kid and I did something really bad, the only punishment that ever reached me was to be told you're not allowed to read for 3 days or 4 days. And the end result was I actually used to know off by heart all the details, all the ingredients in cornflakes, because I was so desperate for reading. I would read packages, instructions, anything if I was forbidden to read books.
Good Lord. And now, with reading that amount of books, does that mean that you would often have two books on the go at the same time, or do you just concentrate on one and just read it and then the next one?
I would always have 8 books on the go. um,
Silly me.
I would have, and I would do it 100 pages of one, put it away 100 pages of the next, and so on. I would have fiction, non-fiction, biography or autobiography, health, environment, and you can see, I think, behind me,
Yeah.
one of the bookshelves. I live in a Martello Tower, and one of the things that I wanted to do when we took it over was to have the two big round room, well, not that they're that big, but the two big round rooms that go up the center of the tower, completely ringed in books. And so that's what I have. There's about 15,000 books here. Now, none of them are important. None of them are kind of first editions that you could get money for. They're just books that I love, segregated the way I love them, so that there's health, there's hardback fiction, there's poetry and plays. Behind me is softback fiction. Upstairs, the Holocaust, biographies, autobiography. It's, and every other aspect of my life is chaotic, but not the books. I can
Don't you
put my
know?
hand on any book at any time, which is not a great thing if the rest of your life is chaotic. But at least you've got something sure to read.
That's amazing. And can I ask you then another question that I that bothers a lot of people who read, not as much as you, but like me. And I would always have a book on the go, and I think I read a reasonable amount. Do you always persevere with a book? If you take up a book, I mean, is there a point where you go, you know what, I've too many other books to read. I'm not going to continue with this because I've given up. And if there is, where is that point? How far do you go before you give up? Or do you never give up? I bet you never give up.
No, I'm afraid to give up because of my mother's ghost. Because my mother had a rule that if you started a book, you had to finish it. With one exception, there was a writer named Earl Stanley Gardner who wrote about a detective, a lawyer who he was escapes me, but a huge bestseller at the time. But my mother regarded Earl Stanley Gardner as total muck. And if you started an Earl Stanley Gardner book, then you needed your head looked at, first of all.
Right.
But if you wanted to ditch it, you could. I think I may have ditched 2 books in the last year with an almost overwhelming sense of guilt, but also a sense of life is very short at this point. I can't afford to waste it on drivel. And let me tell you what drivel is. Not that you've asked. Um, I
I'm
Jesus,
interested. Carry on.
preserve me from any book that is predicated on friggin' texts and social media posts and all that bullshit. I don't want
Okay.
to know. I want to know about people and their feelings and what they're actually doing. Preserve me from books that are based on dreams. Oh, God. I mean, we know that dreams are effectively the rubbish bin of our intellect. it's bad enough that we have them ourselves personally. The hell would we be going through a book that has other people's freaking dream? No, no, don't want that.
So if you wake up having had some kind of amazingly wonderful dream, you're not a bit curious as to why you've had that dream or what it means. It's all baloney.
Oh no, I have never come across a book of psychology or psychiatry that gives a satisfactory explanation for dreams. I think that there's been all sorts of theories, but mostly they're nonsense. And it does vex me that you can't force yourself to dream about a particular person or thing that
Yes.
you would really like to revisit in your life. I've
Yes.
tried that a lot and I have got nowhere so far.
Right.
Although
That's
there is one thing about dreams that I had to approve of at the time. My mother used to dream the winner of the Grand National. And it was very profitable for us for several
the
years.
real winner.
Oh, listen. Yeah, absolutely. And I can actually remember the horse that won it the last year that she did it. It was, I think, 1957, and the horse was called Mr. What. And the reason she stopped being able to do it was that she started taking sleeping pills.
Gone.
So I wanted to go and sue her GP and say, for
Yeah.
Christ's sake, it was much more profitable before she
When
was
she was
on the pills.
absolutely. Yeah. Jesus. Absolutely. All right. Back to books and your 250 that you've read this year. Now, you gave me a great list of your favorites, which I will share on my blog afterwards. But can you pick out a couple that you particularly liked from this year? Give us your top two or three that you liked this year. Is that like choosing your favorite?
Your favorite child? I can do
Yeah,
that really easily. I only
you
have
could
one.
do that. I was just thinking that. Yeah.
It's always the most recent books that I really like. The book that I've just finished is a book called Oddly Squeezed, and it's a book about how middle class Americans are not making it, and how they're getting poorer and poorer, so that professors are on food stamps, which is a form of social welfare. And I hadn't realized before that this thing of borrowing money to go to university in America, it cripples people for life.
Life.
People
Yeah.
in their 40s are being
Mm,
pursued by debt collectors because they've never had the the jobs and the careers that would allow them to pay off the money quickly.
yeah.
And that just I was stuck to the ground by that one. There's a writer who I love whose name escapes me, but he wrote a series of books that I've read this year. One of them is called Isaac Storm, because I love books about plane crashes, ships sinking, catastrophic hurricanes, anything
Real
like that.
life stuff.
Real life, yeah. Now,
Yeah.
Isaac Storm is a historic one. It happened at the end of the 19th century, but I was absolutely fascinated by that. The most recent fiction, I would put two together.
Okay.
Uh, I have a friend named Stephanie Preisner. You may have heard of her because she's
I
very
know
famous.
Stephanie. Yes.
And Stephanie gave me a book by Dolly Alderton called Ghosting.
Ghosts. Yeah.
And is it Ghosts or Ghosting?
Ghosts. Ghosts. I think.
Ghosts, sorry.
Yeah.
And it did have a bit of the kind of social media posting and stuff that I find irritating, but nonetheless, and particularly as it got into her relationship with her parents and so forth, some beautiful stuff in it. So that was one. And then I just almost, well, definitely coincidentally, a book called Monogamy by Sue Miller.
Okay.
And from a quite different age point. Dolly Alderton would be what, mid 30s?
Probably. Yeah.
Sue Miller would be certainly mid 50s, if not older. But they're looking at the same thing. They're looking at being totally in love with men who just fail at the fidelity thing and fail at the commitment thing. And the two plots are quite different, but to read them one after another was really, really fascinating. And the two of them, each of them is really worth reading.
Oh, good. Can I ask you one of the other ones that was on your list? And I downloaded it earlier this year onto my Kindle, and I don't normally read on a Kindle, but I obviously thought I was going to be traveling. Well, and I haven't read it yet, but you reminded me that I have it there waiting for me. Is the one by Caroline Criado Perez, Invisible Women?
Oh my God Almighty. Oh, I mean, this woman, I was going to say she should get an OBE. She has an OBE. This should be on the school curriculum. Every woman working needs to read it. It's one of those fantastic books where, because I have a shot memory after a car crash, if you ask me about that book 6 weeks from now, I'm not going to be able to quote you back things that are in it, but I need to. And so I would have typed out painstakingly about 18 or 19 pages of quotations from that book, of studies, fascinating things. She points out that, for example, medical research has always tended to assume that women are kind of the same as men. So we just research men. Doesn't quite work. And
No.
so medications and other therapies designed for men absolutely don't work for women any more than cat food works for dogs. And she pointed out that it's only in the last decade or so that there's been female crash test dummies.
Yeah.
Up to then, why would we need a female? She looks at aspects of hidden discrimination and at the constant thing of where she instances one company, and I won't name it, but it's one of the big multinationals. And they noticed, because they were looking at the number of women that came to work for them and how they progressed, they noticed that women were not seeking promotion. They were not putting themselves up for promotion, even when they were totally qualified and able for the more
Yeah.
senior jobs. And she makes the fascinating point that the company involved said, this is not good enough. We need women at the top. But instead of fixing what was wrong with the system, they set out to fix the women. They set out to give women training in assertiveness and all that sort of jazz, instead of actually looking at what is it in the way we structure the workplace that is preventing women from becoming all they could be within our own company. And it struck me today, because I'm so much in love with that book. I was looking at a thing about when this pandemic is over and we go back to work, what it's going to have done to construction, to the creation of office blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was reading the thing, I suddenly started, isn't this fascinating? They're looking at a whole load of things, but the one thing they're not saying is every single new office block, every single new block of offices developed by Company A shouldn't be allowed to have one brick put on another until there is a floor or a large section devoted to a creche and a playgroup and a nursery school. That's it. That's a basic. Once you do that, women don't have to leave at 5 to be sure to pick up the child. And no matter whether we like it or not, it's still roughly 70% of the pickups at 5 o'clock are done by women.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm dying to read it now. I'm absolutely dying to read it. And thank you for reminding me. Just as you were talking, I don't know, I mean, this is completely now random, going off on a tangent, But just when you were talking about women and about, this company wondering why they weren't progressing, I think I'm right in thinking I've been watching, and this takes us on to television. I've run out of things on Netflix to watch. So in the last week, myself and himself have found ourselves watching kind of these very strange documentaries that seem to have a theme around aviation. So I've watched one about the Concorde, which was very interesting, and one of my regrets that I never got to fly in Concorde, and about Air Force One, which brought me back to 747s and the magnificent aircraft that they were. But it's just in my head as you're talking to me that, as far as I know, and I think Aer Lingus have come out and said this, that even though they actively want more women to train as pilots, they're finding it really, really, really difficult. And there's still only a very tiny percentage of pilots that are women. So, yeah, it's interesting, even though they actively want women, and I suppose they can't really change the workplace in the same way as an office block can. But
Well, yes, they can. One of the things that that book looks at is there is a thing that happens to women that doesn't usually happen to men, and that's having a baby. And having a baby changes everything, especially if you really, really, really believe that the best thing for the baby is to be breastfed.
mm,
Because you may want to or have to go back to work after 6 months, but do you have to stop breastfeeding the baby at that stage? And let's not go into the details of it, but she's very good on the awful systems that women, particularly pilots, have to face if they want to continue doing something that is genuinely scientifically very important for their
mm,
children. But I don't understand otherwise why women are not becoming pilots, because it is such a fascinating. One of the communication models that we use in my business is there was a fantastic air crash. Fantastic. Now, people died in it, but it was still a fantastic air crash in Sioux City, Iowa. And what happened was that something got hit the plane as it was taking off, and it buggered up its hydraulics, which meant that effectively the pilot discovered that there wasn't much he could do except turn right. And it took him a long time. He got a deadheading pilot who was in a passenger. They all got to work thinking this can't be true, but it was true. So he asked to be given an out of state airport to go to, and they gave him Sioux City, Iowa. And they went into Sioux City, Iowa, and the plane hit, turned over, went on fire, but half of them got out alive. And when they researched it afterwards, Barbara, they found that a key thing that had helped everybody cope and do better than they thought they could have done was that Al Haynes, the pilot, was funny all the time. He
was
was
funny.
funny. He was funny. He was making jokes. He had the air stewards come up to the cockpit. He had his shoulder under the wheel, believe it or not. And he said to them, look, when we go in, I'm not going to be standing. None of us here are meaning we're going to be dead. Here's what you need to do. But then he cracked jokes. And of course, afterwards, they all realized reduced tension, much greater pickup of what the instructions were, because people weren't so tense. So anyway, we use this as an example of don't believe that if you're in a serious situation that you need to be grim. No. You need to still use humor. What he found out afterwards was that he went to the White House to get a medal. And the air traffic controller in Sioux City, Iowa, also got a medal. And they met for the first time. And the air traffic controller in Sioux City, Iowa, said to him, you know, I was only there for 3 weeks. And Al Haynes said, no, really? And he said, yeah, I used to be in JFK and I found it too stressful.
So never take for granted that somewhere quieter is going to be less stressful because you
Yep.
don't know. Brilliant. Brilliant. Oh my God, brilliant. Where are we now? Terry, do you watch with all your reading then? Would I be right in assuming you wouldn't be a huge fan of watching the old television?
Don't know how
No.
to turn on my own television. If I have to watch something, I'll watch it on my tablet.
Right, right. But I mean you must tune into you must I mean, are you a current affairs nerd? I mean, would you feel you have to watch the news every day or no? No.
Yep.
Great. Well, that's one way to stay sane, I guess. Absolutely. And what about podcasts or anything like that to listen to? Would you turn off by listening to music or listening to talking or
I would listen to the odd podcast. Again, people that I know and like Stephanie Preisner. But I actually find not that one, but I find podcasts quite irritating because the presenters don't always adhere to really good broadcasting standards. And I'm thinking, why am I bothering my arse listening to you when I can listen to ordinary radio or television?
yeah.
Not that I do listen to television. The other thing is that I had a car crash about 30 years ago. And one of the things that happened was that the seat belt went across my throat while it was saving my life. But it meant that having been a Feis Ceoil medal winner singing, I couldn't sing anymore. I
Oh,
cannot sing. And the thing is that if I play music in the house, I
you
think
try
I
to
must
sing.
be a really slow learner. The old
Doubt that.
urge to join in, to harmonize, and this awful noise comes out. So I don't often listen to music, and if I do, I'll be listening to something instrumental like Larry Adler on the harmonica or Stefan Grappelli, um, jazz violin. I'm I'm
That's something
very
that
much
won't
an
encourage you to
aficionado
sing.
of trad jazz.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you something else, which is with your kind of professional hat on, I guess, just because I think it's, well, because your insights are always fascinating anyway. Um, Generally, during all of this pandemic and coronavirus thing that we've been dealing with, in a general way, I'm not going to ask you to kind of highlight anybody, but in general, do you think that our government's communication has been, when you look at the communication perhaps from governments abroad, has been pretty good in general?
I would go much further than that, and I haven't had anything to do with it, so I'm nice and clean on this
Yes.
one. I think it's been superb. Um, if you look at the American chaos,
Yeah.
it's just so wonderful to have. It's like a drumbeat, the regularity of the communication. Second thing is that I think that the government made, and I'm not sure who made it, and I'm not sure did media contribute to the making of the decision? But effectively, the communication is half and half. It's government, and then it's Colin
Neffet.
Henry, Tony Houlihan,
Yeah.
De Gascon. And I think that that was a brilliant decision because we have these scientists saying, here's the facts, folks, and here's the numbers, and there you go.
Yeah. We've been pretty
I
lucky in
also
that
think
regard.
when
And
when when the other day, actually, Leo Varadkar said something about that he wished he had, I don't know, either waited to call the election or called it earlier. I can't
oh,
remember what it was.
yes.
But I think the point that he was making was that his party was particularly popular in the early days of the
Yeah.
pandemic. And that really does go back to the old Churchillian thing. People tend to forget that it wasn't just that Churchill had fantastic rhetoric. It was that he was a genius at giving bad news. He didn't do the usual political thing of, this is going to be the greatest year ever, we're going to achieve this. He said, I have nothing to offer you but blood, tears, toil, and sweat. And people have a greater affinity with negative news, a greater capacity to pay attention to it. You know, the
Yeah.
old phrase, no news is good news. Everybody wants bad news, everybody pays more attention, and we tend to trust more in the people who give it to us up front. So I think that all of that has contributed to our government and public health
Yeah.
mostly guys,
Mostly
um,
guys. Yeah.
doing really well.
And this possibly is an unfair question. You can bat it into the touchline if you want. But it's another thing that fascinates me is that in all of this, and we've got the rotating Taoiseach thing. So we had Leo Varadkar and now we have Micheál Martin. And unfortunately, I think Micheál Martin seems to come off the worst by comparison with Leo Varadkar. And I'm just wondering, from your professional point of view, why is that? We somehow feel that, is it because, are we that shallow? Is it because Leo Varadkar is younger and probably more suave and possibly looks more sophisticated, maybe? And that's ageist, I know. Or why is it that people seem to think that Leo Varadkar is much more statesman-like than Micheál Martin?
I think that we need to be wary, Barbara, of the phrase people think,
Okay.
because we tend, what you see depends on where you stand. And if I were to look back on, say, Enda Kenny, when Enda Kenny first became Taoiseach, and I can't even remember who he succeeded, but he was regarded as dire compared to him, as incoherent, as this, that, and the other. And within, about a year, people were saying, oh, he's pretty good. Similarly, if you look at Simon Harris would have gone through, I would suspect, more years than he cares to remember of, sure, he's only a kid. Oh, you could, yeah, social media, but not. And now suddenly he is regarded as the modern equivalent of, say, James Dillon in
Yeah.
terms of acceptability. So I'm not sure that the judgment is as black and white as might be seen. And I think that if you watch Micheál Martin now, not in the beginning, but now, what you're seeing is a man who's been around a long time. He knows how all the systems work. He knows how every program happens. He knows how every briefing, every, conference, he just knows his way around. And I suspect that that will improve the view of him as time goes on. I do need to state fairly clearly that my company has a contract with Fine Gael to do training for its people. But I think I
Excellent.
was fairly fair-minded.
No. Yeah, I would expect nothing less. Absolutely. And it is fascinating. Terry, I wish I could talk to you for about another half an hour because there's loads of things that I would love to tease out with you. Your insights are always they're always interesting and they're always well worth listening to. And I really want to thank you for your generosity in giving me your time today and sharing all of that and such wonderful book suggestions, which, as I say, I'm going to put up on my website once this goes up tomorrow. So look, thank you so much. Stay
It's been
well.
the
Have
best
a lovely
fun.
Christmas. And I hope to see you very soon. Take care, Terry. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. As I say, this is the last one. So as Joe Duffy says, keep washing your hands and mind your little selves. And we will hopefully be back again in January at some stage. But thank you very much for all the episodes that you've watched so far. Thank you for joining us on this one. Have a lovely, safe, peaceful, quiet Christmas. And hopefully we'll all be still here and on the path back to normality in January. Thank you, Terry. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.